When you and I look around our world, we have lots of questions. Some come from a place of curiosity. Some come from a place of critical thinking. Some come from a simple place of criticism. We ask lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of questions, don't we? For good reason. For really good reasons, we ask questions. Because there is a lot going on, a lot that we don't understand, a lot that we look at and go, something's behind this. Something's going on, and I want more information. I need to know. Some questions for us come from deep-seated places of assumption, of judgment. I grew up in the Midwest. We are a suspicious people. We may smile at you, but we are trying to look through you as we are smiling, wondering who you are. Why are you here? Why do you need something from me? Why don't you just go away? Anyone feel that in their lives? Even though I don't live in the Midwest anymore, and I try my hardest not to think all of those questions inside, they happen every single time for me. Anytime someone new, something new comes into my life, I immediately, with my smile on my face, looking, searching, critiquing, all of that inside of me, wondering. But not wondering in a expansive way, wondering in this sort of way. What is it that this person wants from me? Why are they here? And why won't they just go away? We live in a society that more and more asks questions from a place of defensiveness, from a place of exclusion, from a place of us versus them. And that doesn't make us really any different than most societies throughout the history of the world. Most societies have some sort of place of suspicion inside of them. Part of it's biological. It is meant to keep us safe, okay? There is an actual response inside of us that has to do with fear, where we go, hey, I need to be suspicious of why you are here. Why did you cross all of those many, many fields to walk to this place right here, right now? When we go back thousands of years ago, heck, if we just go back even 100 years ago, right? That was what was going on in the world, and often happens in lots of places in the world. Someone like myself from a small town will look at a newcomer like, why did you move here? What did you move away from? What are you trying to hide? What are you trying to run from? We look at folks with different belief systems than ours. Once again, I grew up in this small town. Everyone was Protestants. We looked at Catholics like, what's wrong with you? We even looked at other Protestant denominations that way. We weren't sure they were going to be in heaven anyway, so it didn't matter. Yeah. And then, of course, we do this today more and more with politics, don't we? We look at one another and look at each group and go, why did they vote that way? How did they come to that particular conclusion? What's wrong with them? They must be a terrible, terrible, terrible human being because they voted that direction. And we both do it to one another, don't we? It's real fun. Take a look this morning, look around at one another. There are Republicans and Democrats sitting here. I know it. I can verify it right now, looking around. Literally, look at one another. I want you to see one another this morning. See who you're worshiping with. Because you're worshiping with groups of people here who have voted differently than you, who think about the world's problems differently than you do, who, even no matter what you think is going on in the world right now, will make certain choices come this November that are different than yours. And yet you're all sitting here together. No one's breaking out into a fight yet. Right? How is that possible? How can you walk into this sanctuary and set aside those questions, at least for the moment, when most of us will pick them back up again when we walk out of this sanctuary here today? What makes this space different? What makes this space safe? What makes this space a place of curiosity rather than suspicion? I want you to think about that for a moment, because it's important. It's important for how we operate in the world. Because for many of us, we do walk into this space and it becomes a place of safety, a place where we can set aside some of these identity markers, at least for an hour, maybe even an hour and 20 minutes at times, right? Before we pick them back up again when we walk out into the world. We set them aside long enough not to fight with one another, not to blame one another, not to think that the problems on the other side of the world, or even the ones right across the fields here, are because of them. What happens when we walk into a space of faith, of belief, of curiosity, of wonder, of mystery, of something that calls us higher, more expansive, more inclusive, more open? What happens when I go from this to this? And it's not just a posture that I physically represent there. It actually happens to us. We know psychologically and physically when people open up, a whole bunch of things begin to happen biologically to them. Your breathing shifts. Your eyes, your hearing, it all shifts in the way that you are in the world. All of a sudden, new stimuli that have been probably out there, all of a sudden are let in. And you begin to transform literally in real time. Because all of a sudden you are open, you're curious, rather than and defensive. That's what's happening here in John. This gospel here this morning with Jesus, with these folks all around him, people asking questions of Jesus. They look at this blind man and they are making some assumptions, some judgments that are based out of their own systems of suspicion. It is a world that assumes that all of the bad things that happen had to have come from God. It's a good theological conclusion on its surface. God's all-powerful, God's in control. So if God's all-powerful and in control, then everything that happens must come from God in some way, shape, or form. Right? Some of us get stuck in that same theological box sometimes, right? Particularly when bad things happen in our lives. And we begin to question and wonder, well, why did God let this happen? And we step back into a pretty surface level theology and go, well, God must have willed this to happen, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. It's amazing that 2,000 years of history go by and often we're still asking the same questions as human beings, the same ones that are at the heart of this text. And Jesus goes, hey, it wasn't because of anything this person did, and it's not because of anything that his parents did, and it's really not to do with any of those things. I want you to step back for a moment from whatever assumptions lead you to have these really hard views on life and people. Often about others, but often even about ourselves. Because as we lean into those kinds of assumptions and those surface level theologies, they almost always bring us back to this place of this rather than this. They must always lead us to a more harsh response rather than one of love and of grace. They must always lead us to a place of calcification rather than porousness in the world. And I want you to think about all the people that you really enjoy in life. Most of the people that we consider to be really good aren't calcified at all, are they? They're loving and porous and open. You go, there's kindness there. There's compassion there. There's space for me with them when I am in their space. They allow me to be just as I am. Jesus was that kind of person. Jesus opens up this space, and so these questions that were being asked don't even belong in his space. He rejects those questions. Remember that spot in your classroom growing up where the teacher said there's no bad questions? And then we would all try to figure out a really terrible question to ask the teacher. Yeah. You and I are supposed to be growing in the kinds of questions that we ask. Moving from this place of this to this place of curiosity and wonder. This place of grace and compassion. This place of openness to one another. To the human beings that God has made. And so Jesus, being open to this very human that he himself has created, does this creative act. A creative act that harkens back to the beginnings of Genesis. What does Jesus do? He stoops. He scoops. And he changes this person's life. He stoops onto the ground. He scoops up mud. He applies it to this man's eye sockets. And he says, go and wash yourself in this pool of Siloam, in this pool of being sent, in this pool of you have more life in front of you than you have ever imagined and that the community around you has ever imagined for you. You have a purpose here on this planet because God, you can imagine Jesus going, I created you. And I can recreate you. I can form and reform you out of this dirt over and over and over again until you realize why you are here on this planet. Until you realize you are loved by God. What happens when you and I, instead of taking the assumptions that we have about people, realize that they have been formed out of the dirt and reformed out of the mud of our lives, and that whatever calcification you and I apply to ourselves and other people, God's not done shaping and reshaping us. We're nothing but mud and clay, friends. And like mud and clay, shaped and reshaped and formed. That we have a God, a creator who is actively moving us, shifting us, making us new and renewed at every moment. So the kinds of questions we should be asking are ones that lead us towards reform rather than ones that assume that one cannot change. They should be questions that shape the future rather than assume the past is all that there is. They should be questions that go, there is some reason that I am here, that you are here, that every person that walks up to me is here on this planet, and I have to be open to why God has placed them here. What happens when I begin to ask better questions of the people in my world? What happens when I allow that mud to do its good work? What happens when I allow God to be creator and recreator, to be this artist who is not done with me and not done with our world yet? You and I have a choice, though. We can believe, meaning we can believe in something better, or we can do this. We can stare at others the way I was trained to growing up and wonder why they're here and when they're going to go away. Or we can believe that God has placed them and us here for a reason. When that happens, the light of God shines in the midst of the darkness. When that happens, God's life comes into places of death. When that happens, peace comes into the places of violence and war. When that happens, abundance comes into these places of scarcity. Will you and I choose to see the way that God sees? Amen.